The night of the great mate ceremony arrived not with a whisper, but with a roar, the blood moon casting a bruised purple glow over the jagged peaks of the north. While the village youth scrambled toward the sacred clearing, driven by a primal hunger to surrender their wills to the pull, Lyra Celine walked in the opposite direction. To the others, the bond was a gift. To Lyra, a trained healer who valued the precision of herbs over the chaos of fate, it was a gilded cage. She was securing the shutters of her apothecary when she saw her. Near the rusted village well, a woman stood shivering, her hair like spun starlight and her eyes clouded by the thick fog of a fractured mind. "The storms are coming," the stranger whispered, her hands trembling as she reached for a memory that wasn't there. Ignoring the distant haunting howls of fated pairs finding one another in the woods, Lyra didn't hesitate. She chose a moment of quiet mercy over a lifetime of destiny. Wrapping her wool shawl around the old woman's shoulders, Lyra led her toward the warmth of her shop, unaware that by rejecting the king's ceremony, she had just walked straight into the king's heart. "Thank you for sticking around with me, and welcome back, my wonderful story family. If you're already hooked in for today's story and ready to enjoy it, click subscribe and let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Because tomorrow, I will be giving you another story just as interesting as this one. And you don't want to miss it. Now back to the story. The night the blood moon peaked, it seemed to drain the world of all sensible color, leaving only bruised purples and deep, menacing shadows. Lyra Celine, with her apron dusted in powdered root and her hands stained with calendula oil, watched the distorted light through the tiny, imperfect panes of her apothecary window. The low, guttural thrumming from the far edge of the woods was the sound of the great mate's ceremony beginning. A siren call meant to drag every eligible wolf, regardless of their wishes, toward their assigned fate. To Lyra, the scent of the mating frenzy, an electric mix of pine and musk carried on the cold night air, smelled exactly like resignation. An Omega healer of 24 cycles, Lyra carried the heavy burden of her designation in a world that saw her value only in her potential for procreation. Yet she had built her life, stone by stone, entirely outside of those expectations. She did not seek a master's. She sought knowledge, independence, and the quiet dignity of work performed well. She was, professionally and spiritually, an island. She had just finished securing the heavy wooden shutters, sealing her small warm world away from the chaotic demands of destiny, when she saw the silhouette by the rusted village well. It was a place usually avoided at night, where the cold gathered, yet this figure stood motionless, utterly exposed to the chill. Lyra hesitated for only a second. Her common sense, a highly cultivated defense mechanism, screamed at her to retreat, to wait for the morning. But her hands, the hands that understood the precise balance between poison and cure, moved of their own accord. She pulled her thick wool shawl tight and stepped out into the night. The woman was disoriented, swaying on the cobblestones. Her gown, though now filthy and torn, retained the faint, lingering scent of expensive silk and mountain cedar, an odor that spoke of the capital and high society, not Oakhaven's muddy paths. But it was her hair that startled Lyra, a shocking cascade of white silver, luminous in the moonlight, yet utterly lifeless like frozen starlight. "The storms are coming," the woman whispered, her voice fragile, though her cadence held a crisp upper-class clarity that was entirely foreign to the village. "He's looking for me, but the shadows got there first. They pushed me into the mist." Lyra knelt, noting the purple bruising on the woman's cheekbone and the deep, chapped cracks on her lips. "I am Lyra. We need to get you warm." She ignored the frantic, increasing volume of the howls from the forest. That noise meant nothing here. This woman was real, tangible, and hurt. When she helped the woman rise, she felt the unexpected firmness beneath the frail exterior. This was a body accustomed to being served, not serving, a frame used to holding itself with authority, even now when the mind was clearly adrift. "Do you have a name?" Lyra asked, guiding her gently toward the security of the shop. Hestia, the woman replied, leaning heavily on Lyra. They called me Hestia. But I think that was a long time ago. Before the darkness. Inside the apothecary, the dense aroma of hanging medicinal herbs provided a comforting buffer against the outside world. Lyra settled Hestia onto a bench near the roaring fire she quickly built. The hearth light caught the striking silver in Hestia's eyes, a color often associated with the most ancient, powerful alpha bloodlines. Lyra dismissed the thought immediately. The powerful did not wander lost and confused into backwater villages. Lyra prepared a potent but calming decoction of skullcap, lemon balm, and honey. As Hestia sipped the brew, her clarity briefly sharpened. She studied Lyra with an intensity that felt less like gratitude and more like assessment. "You smell of the earth and independence," Hestia commented, her voice suddenly strong. "Why are you not with your people? Why are you not seeking your bond?" Lyra busied herself checking Hestia's vital signs, refusing to meet the sharp gaze. "The mating ceremony is a tradition built on control, Hestia. It's an easy mechanism for powerful alphas to subdue omegas and keep bloodlines pure. I choose to be free. Healing gives me that freedom." "Freedom is the most expensive herb of all," Hestia murmured, a sorrowful wisdom creeping into her tone. "It is often bought at a loss." Lyra's hands paused. She looked at Hestia, truly seeing the faint ethereal quality of her beauty, the sculpted cheekbones that suggested generations of privilege, and the unwavering straightness of her spine. Even stripped of memory and status, Hestia possessed a natural, innate majesty, a queenly grace. The thought made Lyra laugh internally, a cynical, quick sound. She must be truly tired to imagine the local madwoman was royalty. She applied a soothing compress to the bruise on Hestia's face, choosing to focus on the tangible needs of the body rather than the fantastical whispers of the mind. The tranquility of the apothecary lasted only until the first rays of the weak winter sun attempted to pierce the gloom. The blood moon had set, but the tension it left behind was sharper, coiled tight like a spring. Lyra was boiling water for a restorative tea when she heard the shift in the village. It wasn't the sound of the common folk rising. It was the sound of authority arriving, heavy, measured footsteps, the rhythmic clink of armor, and the deep, coordinated breathing of highly trained soldiers. The enforcer scent hit Lyra first. Polished leather, cold iron, and alpha entitlement. It suffocated the familiar scent of her dried sage and rosemary. Lyra shoved Hestia, who was still fragilely asleep, into the back storage closet, pressing a damp cloth over her mouth to muffle any sound. "Stay silent," Lyra commanded in a fierce whisper. "No matter what happens." She grabbed the closest weapon, the wicked sharp silver shears used for harvesting potent roots, just as the air pressure in the room dropped completely. The sound of the door being splintered was less of a knock and more of an execution. Standing in the frame, his cloak edged with frost and his body radiating a palpable heat, was the reason the pack ranked him a myth more than a man. Caspian Vane, the Alpha King. He filled the small entryway, dwarfing the doorframe. His fury was a palpable thing, thick and poisonous, born of hours of frantic search and the realization that his long-lost mother might have been found, or lost again, in this insignificant, muddy village. His eyes, dark as old storms and fringed by thick black lashes, swept the room, searching for the unique aged scent of his bloodline. Caspian was beautiful in the terrifying way a cliff face is beautiful. All sharp angles, immense strength, and unforgiving power. His aura was overwhelming, a gravitational pull that threatened to drag Lyra to her knees. She fought it, locking her muscles and forcing herself to meet his gaze, shears held high. "Where is she?" Caspian's voice was a low, dangerous rumble that shook the floorboards. "I don't know who she is." Lyra lied, her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. "This is a private residence and a licensed clinic. You have no authority to barge in. Caspian took a menacing step forward, and his wolf shifted closer to the surface. The scent of ozone and raw power intensified, making Lyra's Omega nature scream for submission. She tasted copper and fear, but she held the line. He closed the distance, his eyes blazing, searching her face for the flicker of deceit. She held his gaze with pure, stubborn resistance. Then the moment broke. As Caspian reached the center of the room, he picked up a faint residual scent, Hestia's signature, a unique blend of rare mountain herbs and ancient, silver lineage. His gaze dropped to the hearth, where Hestia's discarded shawl lay carelessly tossed over a chair. Caspian recognized the weave, the faint embroidery, a pattern his mother had favored. His expression, which had been pure, terrifying rage, shattered into something vulnerable and utterly human. He moved to touch the shawl, his massive hand trembling. It was in that moment of profound emotional shock, when Caspian's defenses were down and Lyra's focus was split between the king and the closed closet door, that the true catastrophe occurred. Their eyes met again. The golden current that had sparked between them the night before, merely a curiosity, now detonated. It wasn't a sweet joining. It felt like a violent, biological mistake. A sharp, searing heat shot through Lyra's core, radiating outward, followed by the dizzying, nauseating clarity of soul-deep recognition. Mate. The word wasn't spoken. It was embedded directly into her spirit, a primal, undeniable truth. Lyra gasped, stumbling backward until she hit the edge of her work table. The king, who had been focused solely on his lost mother, froze completely. His nostrils flared, inhaling the combined scent of Lyra's fear and the intense pheromonal spike of the newly established bond. His wolf roared internally. Caspian looked at the tiny, defiant Omega holding shearing shears against him. This was impossible. He was the king of the north, fated to marry a powerful alpha line. Yet, here stood his true match, the woman who had just lied to him, the woman who smelled of independence and reign, who was radiating a terrifyingly strong and resistant Omega essence. He took a slow, deliberate step toward her, his dark eyes wide with shock and a confusing surge of possessive instinct. "Who are you?" he demanded, his voice now ragged, stripped of its regal command, and replaced by the raw panic of destiny fulfilled. Lyra lowered the shears slightly, the anger finally overwhelming the fear. "The Omega who chose to help your mother instead of begging for a husband," she bit out. "And the last woman on this earth who will ever submit to you." The standoff was absolute. The Alpha King, who had spent 10 years searching for his mother, found her and simultaneously found the one person in the world he was biologically bound to, a person who hated the very idea of him. The shock of the bond was instantaneous, but the consequences were slow and agonizing. Caspian stood frozen for a full minute, wrestling with the primal urge to claim and the complex reality of the situation. His mother, the Dowager Queen Hestia, chose this precise moment to emerge from the closet, drawn by the king's desperate, familiar scent. "My boy," Hestia whispered, her face pale, yet her eyes suddenly lucid with memory. Caspian rushed to his mother, embracing her with a ferocity that shook his imposing frame. The moment of tender reunion was profound, but it was punctuated by Hestia's immediate and continued rejection of the citadel and its guards. She clung to Lyra's sleeve, hiding her face in the simple wool of the Omega's apron. "I won't leave her," Hestia insisted, gripping Lyra tightly. "She is warm. The others are cold." Caspian tried to reason with her, offering her favorite jewels and promises of warm baths and comfort, but Hestia only burrowed deeper into Lyra's side. The king finally stood, turning his turbulent gaze back to the Omega. The bond pulsed between them, an invisible, agonizing current. It demanded contact, reconciliation, and acceptance. Lyra fought it, channeling all her energy into the stubborn refusal. She felt the internal struggle raging in the king, too, the battle between his duty and his biology. "You have saved her," Caspian stated, reverting to the formal language of the crown. He signaled to Commander Titus, who was waiting stiffly by the door. Titus approached, carrying a heavy, leather-bound satchel. "For this service, I owe you everything. You will be compensated beyond your wildest imagination." Titus unlatched the satchel and spilled its contents onto Lyra's worn wooden counter. The light of the morning sun caught the hall. Gold coins, glittering gemstones, and small rolled scrolls of parchment stamped with the royal seal, signifying ownership of large tracts of land. Enough wealth to make Lyra the richest woman in 5 villages. Lyra looked at the display of excess. Her worn apothecary counter, usually covered with the humble tools of her trade, mortars, pestles, and dried herbs, was now desecrated by the king's blatant transactional assumption. "Put it away," Lyra said, her voice dangerously calm. Caspian frowned. "What did you say?" "I said put it away." Lyra pushed the scattered coins back toward the satchel with the tip of her shears. "I do not require your gold. I require no man's patronage to live my life." "This isn't patronage," Caspian growled, his pride stung. "It is compensation. Royal favor." "Favor," Lyra scoffed, meeting his gaze squarely. "Favor is the thin veneer alphas use to disguise ownership. You think I saved your mother so I could become a wealthy subject? I did it because I am a healer, and it was the right thing to do." The king's eyes narrowed, a mixture of baffled fury and grudging admiration warring in their depths. He was accustomed to deference, fear, or lust, but never this absolute, principled rejection. "You reject the crown's debt," he challenged. "I reject the assumption that everything can be bought, King Caspian," Lyra retorted, leaning her hands on the counter. "You tried to use your gold to erase your debt to me, thinking that would make me beholden to you. But if you truly want to honor what I did, you will start by respecting my status as an equal, a commoner, a free woman, not a resource to be purchased or a pet to be rewarded." The weight of her words settled heavily in the small room. Hestia watched the exchange, a faint, knowing smile touching her lips. Lyra's defiance was the strongest dose of truth this king had ever been forced to swallow. Caspian finally gave a sharp, frustrated sigh, running a hand through his dark, wind-tousled hair. He nodded curtly to Titus, who reluctantly gathered the opulent payment. "Very well," Caspian conceded, the words tight and grudging. "You will not accept gold. Then you will accept my protection." The woman who recognized the Queen Mother's distress without being blinded by her status is clearly a threat to those who wanted her gone. "I cannot leave you here to be targeted." "I am perfectly capable of protecting myself," Lyra argued, but even as she spoke, the truth hit her. She had sheltered the most wanted woman in the kingdom. Her safe, secluded life was over. "You are my fated mate," Caspian countered, lowering his voice so only she could hear, the possessive rumble returning. "And you are the only person keeping my mother sane. You will come to the Citadel. Not as a subject then, but as my necessary guest." He forced the word out as if it tasted like ash. "You will be escorted, respected, and given every resource necessary for the Queen's recovery. But you will come." The ultimatum was cleverly delivered. He was forcing her hand through duty, not authority. Lyra glanced at Hestia, whose grip had tightened on her apron. There was no choice. The well-being of the Queen Mother, however reluctantly, was now Lyra's responsibility. "I will come," Lyra said, her voice clipped and cold. "But know this, Alpha King. I am coming to heal your mother, not to be claimed by her son. You may have found your destiny, but I have not accepted it." The journey to the Citadel was a clash of worlds. Lyra's small rickety carriage, which she usually used to transport her medicinal harvests, was quickly replaced by a mammoth, armored royal coach. She sat across from Caspian, feeling the oppressive weight of his presence and the distracting low hum of the mate bond, which now felt less like a violent collision and more like chronic low-grade torture. Hestia, oblivious to the political tension, hummed softly and played with Lyra's calloused healer's hands, only occasionally flashing a look of profound sorrow at her son. The citadel itself was a sprawling monstrosity of ancient gray stone and cold, sharp angles. It did not invite warmth. It demanded awe. Lyra stepped out onto the polished marble courtyard and felt instantly stripped bare, exposed to the scrutiny of 1,000 hostile eyes. She was dressed in her practical wool skirt and simple linen tunic, a sharp contrast to the velvets and silks of the courtiers who lined the steps. Whispers followed her like small, venomous insects. The Omega upstart. A commoner found under the blood moon. How humiliating for the king. The healer who refused the mate ceremony to save the queen. A transparent ploy for power. Caspian, acutely aware of the shame and judgment focused on his newfound mate, held himself with stoic rigidity. He tried to usher Lyra past the throng, but she resisted, holding her head high. "I am here to care for the Dowager Queen, Hestia, at your command," Lyra announced, her voice ringing clear despite her lower vocal register. "I have no designs on this place, nor any interest in your politics. If I am to be judged, let it be on the merit of my work, not the accident of my birth." Her defiance only served to fuel the court's disdain. She was assigned a suite of rooms attached to Hestia's private wing, a luxury Lyra found overwhelming. The silk sheets, the heavy tapestries, the constant presence of liveried servants. It felt like a cage disguised in wealth. The Shadow Council, a group of older, conservative alphas and betas who served as the king's advisors, made their displeasure known immediately. Duke Varric, a tall, impeccably dressed man with sharp eyes and an unsettlingly smooth manner, cornered Lyra in the queen's receiving room. "You must understand, healer," Varric said, his tone dripping with condescension, "that your presence here, while necessary for Her Majesty's current comfort, disrupts decades of tradition. The king is expected to choose a queen who can strengthen alliances, not one who weakens his legitimacy. You are, quite simply, an unwelcome variable." "Then perhaps the king should not have been so careless as to lose his mother," Lyra retorted, adjusting the placement of a freshly cut sprig of calming willow bark in Hestia's tea. Varric's smile tightened, turning predatory. "Watch your tongue, Omega. The palace is an ecosystem, and those who upset the balance are often eliminated." Lyra felt a shiver, realizing the danger was very real. Her fierce independence had thrust her into the heart of a political game she was utterly unprepared for. Caspian, seeing the conflict, intervened, pulling Lyra away. "Do not engage with them," he ordered, his hand gripping her arm tightly. "You do not understand the rules of this place." "The rules of this place involve threats of elimination?" Lyra shot back, wrenching her arm free. "No wonder your mother ran." The barb struck deep. Caspian winced, his dark eyes shadowed with pain. He was trying to protect her, but Lyra saw his protection as yet another attempt at control. The bond pulsed, urging them toward reconciliation, toward trust, but Lyra's decades of cynicism fought every instinct. The bond was not instantaneous love. It was a constant, draining awareness of the other person's emotional state. Lyra felt Caspian's exhaustion, his immense burden of leadership, and his profound loneliness. Caspian, in turn, felt Lyra's bristling resistance, her acute need for self-reliance, and the deep, cynical belief that any offered affection was simply a prelude to subjugation. Caspian realized force would never work with her. He shifted his tactics. He began to court her, but not with jewels or flowers, which she would simply reject. He courted her with the truth of his life. He brought her to the throne room late one night, the massive space empty save for the echo of their footsteps. He stood on the raised dais, placing his crown upon his head. "This is the weight," he said, his voice quiet in the vast room. "It is not glory, Lyra. It is a suffocating responsibility. I command armies, regulate grain stores, and settle feuds that predate my grandfather." He looked at her, truly vulnerable for the first time. "My father ruled through fear and tradition. His laws were cold, built on the premise that alphas are supreme and omegas are secondary. I have tried to maintain order while subtly softening the edges. But I cannot remake the kingdom alone. I need a strength that is not based on brute force." Lyra watched him, her hand unconsciously tracing the scars on her own wrist. Small nicks from years of harvesting dangerous roots. She saw not the king of legend, but a man drowning in inherited duty. The bond shifted, no longer demanding submission but offering partnership. "What do you need?" she asked, her voice softer than she intended. "I need your sight," Caspian admitted, stepping down to her level. "You see the pain of the common people. You didn't care that Hestia was the queen mother. You cared that she was hurt. That mercy, Lyra, is what this kingdom lacks. If we are truly fated, let it be because we complement each other. Let me show you that power can be used to protect, not just to control." He started inviting her to observe court proceedings. He didn't ask her opinion in front of the council, knowing the political disaster that would cause, but afterward he would seek her out. "Did I rule correctly on the timber dispute?" he would ask. "You gave the Beta clan the rights," Lyra observed, "but you didn't ask why the Omega farmers needed the wood for their drying sheds. You solved the Alpha's problem but perpetuated the Omega's struggle." Caspian listened, his expression thoughtful. He was learning. Lyra found herself less angry and more intensely curious. He was not the monster of her cynical imagination. He was simply a powerful man trapped by his birthright, desperately seeking a new path. Hestia's progress was erratic. Days of crystal clarity would be followed by nights of deep, paranoid confusion. Lyra spent hours coaxing her through the fog, using gentle massage and bespoke herbal remedies. One damp afternoon, Hestia and Lyra were in the queen's private solarium, overlooking the vast manicured gardens. Hestia was enjoying a cup of calming rosehip tea. Duke Varric, whose presence seemed to permeate every corner of the citadel, entered the solarium, feigning polite concern. "Your Majesty seems remarkably improved," Varric noted, his smile too wide, too smooth. "It is a testament to King Caspian's care." Hestia, who had been relaxed, stiffened instantly. The teacup rattled violently in the saucer. Her eyes, those magnificent silver-blue eyes, fixed on Varric with chilling recognition. Varric, sensing the shift, took a nervous step back, his professional veneer cracking. Hestia didn't speak the Duke's name. Instead, she pointed a trembling finger toward his signet ring, a piece of heavy black iron depicting a stylized falcon. "The air," Hestia gasped, shrinking into the silk cushions. "The smell of ozone and the rain before the cliff." It was him. He said I was too weak and that Caspian was too young to lead. He pushed me. He pushed me toward the border mist. Lyra's blood ran cold, matching the temperature of the stone floor. The pieces clicked into place with horrifying clarity. Hestia's sudden disappearance years ago, the memory loss designed to protect her from the trauma, and the fact that the man who wanted to control the king's marriage was the very man who tried to murder his mother. Duke Varric recovered quickly. Poor Queen Hestia. The confusion continues. "A consequence of the trauma, I assure you, my king," he said smoothly, turning to Caspian, who had entered the room moments before. Caspian looked between his mother's absolute terror and Varric's practiced composure. Lyra saw the agonizing doubt in the king's eyes. Varric had been his mentor, a father figure since the Dowager Queen's alleged death. The betrayal was too immense to grasp immediately. Hestia began to weep, a deep, inconsolable sound. "He lies, Lyra." He wants the throne. He wants my boy to choose weakness. Lyra stepped forward, placing herself squarely between the Duke and the Queen. The Queen Mother is lucid, Your Grace. Her memory is returning, piece by piece. Perhaps you should step away. Varric's eyes, usually calculating, held a genuine glint of murderous intent as he looked at Lyra. He didn't need to speak. Lyra knew he now saw her not just as a political nuisance but as a direct threat to his life and claim. That night, Lyra found Caspian in his private study. The room was dark, lit only by the sputtering oil lamps of his desk, where maps and ledgers lay scattered. He was pacing, the scent of distress sharp in the air. Werewolf has been loyal for a decade, Caspian whispered, his voice ravaged by doubt. He guided me through the darkest days after she vanished. How can I? Because she is your mother, and he tried to kill her, Lyra finished, walking toward him. She closed the distance she had meticulously maintained for weeks. Betrayal is not always obvious, Caspian. It hides in plain sight, using trust as a weapon. She placed her hands on his chest, feeling the deep, powerful rhythm of his heart. The bond flared instantly, a wave of comfort and affirmation washing over them both. Lyra didn't pull away. She leaned into it. He tried to turn your pain into his power, Lyra said softly. He knows I see the truth, and he knows the mate bond means I will fight for your family. He is already laying the groundwork to destroy me, to silence Hestia, and to convince the council you are weak. Caspian gripped her shoulders, his eyes searching hers, no longer seeing an omega or a subject, but the fierce, principled heart that had saved his line. You hate the bond. You hate the idea of being owned. Why are you risking everything for a crown you want nothing to do with? Because you showed me the burden, not just the glory, Lyra confessed. Because power, when placed in the right hands, can change the fate of thousands. And because, she paused, admitting the deepest, most dangerous truth, my need for independence doesn't mean I want to be alone. I choose you, Caspian, not as my master, but as my partner in this impossible fight. The confession was an oath. It transcended the biology of the bond. It became an act of free will. Caspian leaned down, his eyes dark with immense emotion. He didn't seize her, he asked. Lyra. My heart. When their lips finally met, it was not the frantic primal urge of the bond, but the deliberate deep kiss of mutual commitment. It sealed the alliance, the political, physical, and emotional joining of two halves that had chosen to complete the other. They spent the rest of the night planning. Lyra, the healer, knew about poisons, vulnerabilities, and human anatomy. Caspian, the king, knew strategy, leverage, and the Citadel's vast network of loyalties and lies. They had to move first. Chapter 8. The Traitor's Gambit. Werewolf was already one step ahead. He realized that Hestia's memory was solidifying, and the Omega upstart now possessed the king's complete trust. He decided to strike during the royal masquerade, a traditional event held during the waxing moon, when the entire court and key pack leaders would be gathered. Lyra, dressed in a borrowed gown that felt like a foreign skin, moved through the crowded ballroom, her gaze constantly searching. The air was thick with the scent of perfume, wine, and hundreds of wolves in formal attire. She held Caspian's hand, projecting confidence she didn't feel. Caspian had warned her, Werewolf will try to humiliate or eliminate you. Stay close. The moment came during the toast. Werewolf, with a magnificent flourish, raised a silver goblet to the king, and they hoped for peace in the new moon era. As Caspian raised the cup to his lips, Lyra caught the faintest acrid scent underlying the sweet wine, wolfsbane. A small, carefully measured dose meant to neutralize the king's alpha strength, leaving him vulnerable to a fabricated accident during the ensuing chaos. Before Caspian could drink, Lyra acted purely on instinct. She slammed her elbow into his wrist, sending the goblet crashing to the marble floor. "Forgive me, my king," Lyra said quickly, loud enough for the entire hall to hear, pulling a handkerchief from her sleeve. A sudden dizzy spell. "I must have caught a chill." Varric's face was a mask of cold fury. He stepped forward. "Careless behavior. Omega. Perhaps you should retire." "Perhaps," Lyra agreed, but her eyes were fixed on the stains spreading across the marble. The wine was smoking faintly, a reaction to the polished stone. Before Varric could seize the momentum, the second part of his plan was enacted. A contingent of his personal guards, who had been tasked with locating Hestia, burst into the ballroom, swords drawn, yelling that the Queen Mother had been attacked in her rooms. Caspian roared, a primal sound of pure rage that silenced the entire hall. He drew his ceremonial sword. "Varric! Preposterous!" the Duke yelled, feigning shock. "This is clearly a conspiracy designed by the Omega to discredit me." Lyra was already sprinting toward the main corridor, ignoring the chaos. She had foreseen this. Earlier that evening she had moved Hestia, not to her hidden passage, but to the old and used apothecary wing, a maze of forgotten kitchens and dried storage rooms that no courtier would ever think to check. She found Hestia huddled behind a massive and used grain silo. Two of Varric's finest assassins had cornered her, their blades reflecting the flickering torchlight. Lyra didn't hesitate. She threw a heavy glass jar of highly concentrated cayenne pepper and crushed nettle leaves into the nearest man's face. He screamed, clutching his eyes, his alpha focus broken by the agonizing, blinding sting. The second assassin turned on her. He was faster, aiming a brutal kick. Lyra ducked, using her small size to her advantage. She reached into the pouch tied around her waist, not for a healing tonic, but for a small, sharp knife she usually used for scoring roots. She moved with the precise, practiced speed of someone who understood that the quickest way to end a struggle was to target the pressure points. She struck the femoral artery of his leg, just enough to cause immediate, debilitating pain and bleed out his fighting strength without killing him outright. "Healers know where the body is weakest," Lyra hissed, standing over the whimpering assassin. Back in the ballroom, Caspian was fighting with the cold, deliberate fury of a betrayed king. Varric himself had joined the fray, revealing himself to be an aging but still formidable alpha. Lyra returned, pulling Hestia, shaky but safe, into the room just as Caspian disarmed Varric. "Mother!" Caspian cried, relief flooding his face, giving him the final surge of strength. Hestia stepped forward, pointing at the kneeling Duke. "He tried to silence me." Lyra took her chance. She pulled the now unconscious first assassin into the center of the hall, tearing his sleeve. Tucked into his vambrace was a tiny sealed vial of liquid wolfsbane, identical to the trace residue she had smelled in the king's spilled wine. "Your Grace claimed this was a conspiracy against you," Lyra said to Varric, her voice ringing with the authority of irrefutable proof. "But only your men carry the king's poison, and only you knew where to find the Queen Mother outside of her chambers. You sought to destroy the royal line and seize the crown." Varric, defeated, roared his final protest, but the pack leaders, witnessing the physical proof and Hestia's testimony, finally turned their backs. The ensuing weeks were a period of brutal, necessary cleansing. With Varric imprisoned and the Shadow Council disgraced, Caspian had the political leverage he needed. He did not simply execute the traitors. He exposed them, showing the kingdom the rot that had festered beneath the surface of his father's tradition. Lyra, standing visibly at Caspian's side, was no longer a silent guest but a recognized partner. She did not seek a political title, but she influenced every decision, ensuring that the perspective of the common wolf was never overlooked. 3 moons after the masquerade, under the clear, hopeful light of a brand new moon, Caspian convened the Great Council. "For decades," Caspian announced, his voice powerful enough to carry across the citadel grounds where thousands of wolves gathered, This kingdom has been shackled by fear and division. My own father's reign, driven by the rigid, outdated belief in the purity of bloodlines and the supremacy of the Alpha, led directly to the near murder of my mother and the betrayal of my closest advisors. He paused, looking directly at Lyra, who stood at the foot of the throne. The mate bond found me, not in a clearing where wolves chase biological destiny, but in a small apothecary, through an act of selfless mercy, he declared. This bond does not represent ownership. It represents choice and partnership. Therefore, I declare the end of the claiming laws. A collective gasp went up from the crowd. He was abolishing the entire framework of society. Effective immediately, Caspian continued. Every wolf, regardless of their rank, alpha, beta, or omega, has the inalienable right to choose their own path, their own profession, and their own partner. The mate bond is sacred, but the law must protect free will. We choose a new moon era, built on justice and equality. Weeks later, the wedding was small, private, and by deliberate choice. Lyra wore no crown, only a simple circlet woven with silver willow bark and fresh lavender. She stood with Caspian, accepting his bond not because biology demanded it, but because her heart had finally chosen to open. "I am not your queen of power, Caspian," Lyra whispered, her hand tracing the faint lines of worry around his eyes. "You are my queen of truth, Lyra," he corrected, pulling her close. "And you have healed not just my mother, but this entire kingdom." Lyra Selene, the resilient Omega healer, had finally found the independence she craved. Not in solitude, but in the ultimate partnership, merging her wisdom with his strength to forge a new future for their kind, where destiny was merely an invitation, not a command. Thank you for watching this story to the end. And if you enjoyed the plot, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the amazing new stories coming soon. See you next time.